Thank you very much for such a broad-ranging assessment of the strategic aspects of the scenario, both at the global level and then focused specifically on the situation in Asia. I think you have brought in some very interesting insights from Indonesia. Let me assure you that among Indian scholars there is a huge interest, huge interest in terms of Indonesia's mindset. So when I take copious notes of what you said, two things strike me tremendously. When you say that there is a perception in Indonesia that both India and Indonesia punch below the weight, this comes as quite a surprise to us, because probably most perceptions here would be that while India punches on its weight or maybe a little above its weight, Indonesia certainly punches below its weight. But the other remark that you made, the other remark of your assessment was even more significant when you said that both US and China are potentially belligerent nations in Asia. Now this, for people in New Delhi in particular, might sound something very debatable, because talking quite honestly, despite all the economic dependence and so on, or interdependence, clearly India's national security policy has much to take into account the actual behavior of China. And India does look towards the US as a very important strategic partner. But still, in terms of Indonesian perception, that certainly both these powers cause concern, that is something very significant. We have also noted your remarks about India-Indonesia relations and Indonesia's role in ASEAN. These are all very creative, and we would have a chance to discuss them. I thank you very much. But really very insightful and very interesting presentation you have made. At this stage, may I now request Ambassador Anil Wadhwa to address you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, sir. I would like to first of all begin by saying that truly the Asian century has arrived. We have to take into account the fact that this is the region which is now driving the world economy. And with it, it has also brought about a sense of interest from the major powers around the world. They all have an interplay today in the Indo-Pacific region, which has gained currency as a terminology. It came into existence as a terminology some years ago, and at that point in time, not many paid attention to it. But that's happened because of the fact that security issues have got linked with the economic issues, and they cannot be now extricated from each other. Naturally, therefore, there is an interest in this region from the United States, Russia, and China as the main players in the region, but also the regional countries and powers. And so India, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, etc. are all countries that are involved, very much involved in this process. The issue of South China Sea has been a major development for the region, where it's not just a dispute per se, but also the fact that international rules and order have been challenged. And not much has been done about it, and it seems unlikely that much will be done about it in the near future either, despite the fact that there has been a tremendous backlash to what has happened in the South China Sea. So India is watching this with alarm. It has watched it with alarm for a number of years now, but since we are not directly involved in the South China Sea disputes, we can only pronounce ourselves on this aspect. And we have done so by siding with ASEAN, emphasizing on ASEAN unity and centrality, and at the same time emphasizing also that given the fact that world trade passes through the sea lanes of this region, and the South China Sea is an important place today in the world, that the world rules and order must be maintained, and therefore UNCLOS is crucial in this aspect. Now, proceeding from that, as far as Indo-Pacific is concerned, what would India like to see and do as far as ASEAN is concerned? Because we see ASEAN as central to the integration which has happened in Asia. And from that perspective, we would like to move ahead with ASEAN and blue economy and coastal surveillance, building of offshore patrolling capabilities, hydrographic services, information sharing for increased maritime domain awareness, which was mentioned by our last speaker as well. And maritime domain awareness I see as an emerging issue in the immediate future as far as India and ASEAN is concerned. Why I say that is because I do not see a security architecture emerging in the region at all. And this is a statement which is perhaps goes against the grain of what everybody has been saying, that we need a security architecture in the region. And India itself has presented a paper on a security architecture. But there are differing views. There are people who see security in the region in a different light. These are differences which, in my view, cannot be reconciled easily. It can't be reconciled easily because there are various interests involved and there are various superpowers involved. And therefore, the best that we can do is to have a regional arrangement which will take care of security. And I feel that regional arrangement cannot be done as a large grouping. It can only be done on a bilateral basis between India and ASEAN, which we've been trying to do. That itself will bring about a semblance or a core of a regional security architecture, in quotes, if I may call it that. So how does one do that? It's essentially making sure that that to protect our sea lanes of communication, also to meet the convergences that we have between ASEAN and India, we track, first of all, things like passage and developments of naval vessels and ships in the South China Sea. We have closer defense cooperation between India and ASEAN. Already we see a great amount of cooperation bilaterally with countries like Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, and also we have some long-standing existing arrangements with countries like Malaysia and Singapore. These have emerged as, in my view, priority areas in this relationship. And so, some time ago, when people talked about Indian interest in the states of Malacca or Lombok or Sunda, that was something that we would always say may not have held so much of interest for us in the past, but it does now because of the developments that have taken place in this region. And that is why the cooperation with Singapore in terms of maritime domain awareness and exchange of information has also become that much important. Second, and this point has been made earlier, I think what India and ASEAN need to do is to deepen the economic integration. We've been talking about these figures, for example, ASEAN accounting for 10.2% of India's total trade, etc. But then we also had a discussion in the last session where it was clearly brought out that we are struggling to meet the $100 billion mark in bilateral trade between each other. Our trade has got stuck in the region of $76 billion at the most. And many things have happened which have affected this. One is, of course, the fact that our FTA has not worked well, if I might call it that. India would, of course, like to see the services and investment part of it also being ratified by the remaining two ASEAN countries. But at the same time, India traditionally has been a country which has looked to its domestic market and not so much is an export-driven economy. So we all keep talking about the fact that our trade is not increasing, but there's also this important factor there. But of course, time has come now, and this is what is being analyzed within the government and the academic circles in India, that for our economy to grow and to become a country with a manufacturing base which must increase to 25% of GDP, we have to adapt ourselves to a model where we export more, and therefore ASEAN becomes that much more important for us in this context. As far as RCEP is concerned, we had a big, long discussion on this in the last session. I participated towards the end, and I feel there again, there's not been much progress because of, given the experience in the past with other FTAs, the issue of movement of professionals, for instance, that has not got a good response from the RCEP participating countries, and therefore India is reluctant to open up its market for the targeted goods to that extent that it could. If we analyze our trade figures, there's been a drop in agricultural products exports from India. They face a high import tariff and barriers, NTBs as we call them, from some ASEAN countries. And that is why I still feel that we will struggle in the near future to achieve that $100 billion target. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that there is, the light has got shut out. In the future, there's always hope of improving upon this because we know the problems now. Third, many of the speakers today have emphasized on the issue of connectivity. Definitely through land, sea and air, in order to cut down the movement of costs of goods and movement of goods and services between India and ASEAN. We have talked about the trilateral highway, the other projects that we have in the regional context as well. But we never discussed the $1 billion credit line that has already been announced by India in 2015. What has happened to this issue? Basically, the fact is that to utilize this fund, ASEAN countries have to prepare projects and proposals. And that's where we've got stuck because unless we build in a component of consultancies which will be reimbursed to this fund as well on our part, then others will be reluctant to come forward and spend so much of money on spending on consultancy fees because these are not small projects, these are large projects. Second, there has been a credit line of $77 million which has been initiated also towards CMLV countries. And there again, the initiatives from the concerned countries have been few and far between. On the other hand, if you look at the quick impact projects which we had between India and CMLV countries, all of them have been a resounding success. They were all utilized very quickly and had a great turnover. In fact, the entire budget was taken up as soon as it was announced within 1.5 years. Then again, as far as the trilateral is concerned, it's not just the trilateral. I think what we need there is also arrangements to sustain the trilateral. And that means that there should be economic hubs of economic activity along the trilateral where India should be talking to Myanmar, for instance, or getting third parties involved in setting up projects along the highway. So in future, if we have a railway link which runs along the highway, that could also piggyback on these projects. Otherwise, the trilateral is not going to work. And it's also not going to work if we do not have the last mile connectivity in the northeast on our side, because it cannot be a one-way street. The northeast of India will open up to the ASEAN through Myanmar and Thailand, and then we would require to see exports and imports taking place. If we have only imports taking place in the first year or so, it will be very disheartening. So I don't think a project of this size can sustain itself if not enough preparations are done. Now, everybody talks about a delay which has happened in the trilateral. I accept that there's been 4 to 5 years of delays, but at the same time, it has given time for the policymakers in India at least to think about what is required to make it more viable. And what I'm mentioning is just two of those things. But at the same time, how to improve the soft connectivity with Myanmar, for instance. Look at the motor vehicles agreement and look at the customs issues. How to solve them has been a major focus as well. So that has given India time and these countries time to look at these issues. We've talked about a trilateral arrangement, a motor vehicles arrangement between Thailand, Myanmar and India, which is at an advanced stage. And that all would not have happened if we did not have this time. So in a way, it's been a blessing in disguise in my view. And I think we should get all these things sorted out much before the trilateral opens out. Sea connectivity, and this was mentioned also by one of the previous speakers. Of course, we have the multimodal transport project, Kaladan, with Myanmar, etc. We've talked about developing the Sitwe port with Myanmar. We've also had a proposal of linking Dawei with Chennai, etc., and therefore linking up the eastern seaboard of India, ports like Ennore, etc., which will cut down shipping costs and distance. But at the same time, I think what we need to look at